The U.S. economy evolved from a colonial agrarian base to the world's largest, driven by innovation, policy, and global influence. Here's a snapshot of its journey. Agriculture dominated, with the South reliant on enslaved labor for crops like tobacco and cotton, while the North focused on trade and small-scale manufacturing. Milestones. British mercantilism limited colonial trade, sparking independence. 1776. The Constitution, 1789, unified markets, and the first Bank of the United States, 1791, stabilized currency. 19th century industrial rise. Early 1800s, the market revolution brought canals, roads, and railroads, boosting trade. Cotton exports soared, but the South's reliance on slavery deepened inequality. Mid-1800s, the Industrial Revolution fueled northern factories, while the Gold Rush, 1849, spurred westward growth. The Civil War, 1861 to 1865, devastated the South but accelerated northern industry. Gilded Age, 1870s to 1890s. Railroads, oil, and steel made the U.S. an industrial giant, with GDP growing approximately 4% annually. Tycoons like Carnegie and Rockefeller built empires, but monopolies and panics, 1873-1893, exposed vulnerabilities. 20th century, global dominance. Early 1900s, progressive reforms curbed monopolies, and the Federal Reserve, 1913, stabilized finance. World War I made the U.S. a global creditor, the 1920s to the 1930s. The Roaring Twenties drove consumerism, but the 1929 crash triggered the Great Depression. GDP fell 30%, unemployment hit 25%. Roosevelt's New Deal introduced Social Security and public works, aiding recovery. World War II and post-war boom, 1940s to 1960s. Wartime production ended the Depression, doubling GDP by 1945. The U.S. led global trade via the Bretton Woods system, with the dollar as the world's reserve currency. The 1950s to 60s saw suburban growth, consumer goods, and approximately 50% of global GDP. The 1970s to 1990s, stagflation, 1970s, from oil crises, challenged growth. Reagan's tax cuts and deregulation, 1980s, spurred recovery but widened inequality. The 1990s tech boom, internet, computers, drove productivity and surpluses. 21st century resilience amid crises. 2000s, the dot-com bust and 9/11 caused a mild recession. A housing bubble set the stage for the 2008 financial crisis. GDP fell 4.3%, unemployment hit 10%. Stimulus and bailouts fueled recovery. 2000s to 2020. Tech giants, Apple, Amazon, and shale energy drove steady 2 to 3% annual growth. Tech giants, Apple, Amazon, and shale energy drove steady 2 to 3% annual growth. The COVID-19 pandemic, 2020, slashed GDP by 31% in Q2. Stimulus and vaccines spurred a rebound. By 2025, U.S. GDP is approximately $28 trillion, but challenges include $33 trillion in debt, inflation, peaked at 9.1% in 2022, and inequality. Top 1% hold approximately 32% of wealth.